Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." The most elemental truth to him that we could perceive empirically was our own existence. Without the subject, which could think thoughts, there could be no thoughts, and therefore the process of thought itself was evidence of a subject which could generate that thought. Something that Descartes didn't really explore was psycholinguistics, or the question of language. Where does language come from? In Descartes' example, there is a demon who has created a Maya, to borrow from the Hindu term. That demon has created an illusion of the world. And so we can't trust our sense data, we can't trust our perceptions. We know that we make incorrect assessments all the time. We think we saw something out of the corner of our eye, but it was a hallucination. We thought we heard something, but we misinterpreted. We thought we smelled something, but it wasn't actually there. Descartes takes this to the extreme example of saying, well, what if everything we perceived was wrong? At least we could be confident in our own subjectivity, our own existence as a subject, as a mind-generating thought. Modern materialist science, neuroscience, has brought this into question. What if the brain is just a composite of neurons, and what if these neurons are governed by simple biochemistry and electromagnetism? And what if the brain is merely a complicated organic computer? We do not ascribe subjectivity or consciousness in the scientific sense to computers, and therefore this would invalidate the reality of our consciousness. Consciousness would again be an illusion generated by this emergent evolutionary process of Darwinian evolution, building complexity upon complexity to achieve utilitarian results of reproduction. The spiritual notion that we have of the soul, which in many cases is synonymous with consciousness, would be invalidated by the findings of modern science. So if we then go back to Descartes and we ask Descartes, well, yes, you do think, but the process of thinking that you perceive, if we look at modern science, materialistic science, you're just a meat sack. You're a meat body, a meat bag with a meat brain. And you're just atoms, and you're just electrons, and you're just neurons firing, and you're like a complex, meaty computer, and you don't have a real consciousness. That's just something you perceive. Your emotions are fake. You know, your happiness is fake. Your sadness is fake. It's all just chemicals. If we get ourselves to this extreme materialist position, which a lot of people believe in, then we have to go back and question Descartes. In light of all this modern science, we have to say, Descartes, it's not necessarily true that you think, therefore you are. You think, and therefore there is a thinking process which is occurring. But it does not entail your true subjectivity. That is, you are merely a composite of component parts which can be broken down into their material, reducible components. These do not have consciousness. These do not have spirituality. These do not have soulfulness, and therefore the sum of the parts is no greater than its components. So if you're just made up of material parts, biochemistry, then the result is not consciousness, the result is not a soul, the result is not spirituality. The result is just the illusion, the emergent illusion of all of that. In the same way that we say, well, evolution seems to be increasing complexity, but evolution is blind. Evolution has no intention. In the same way we would say that a human being has no true intentions, but intentionality is an illusion created by an emotional system developed by blind evolution. Because there is no intentionality in the electron, intentionality never enters into the equation. It's simply a complex illusion of working parts, programs developed by blind evolution that result in this illusion of intentionality. So that's where we arrive back at Descartes, and we say, Descartes, there is no you. There's this thinking process which is an illusion. It's a program run by your DNA. The construct of the mind, that's all it is. there is no Descartes. There is no subject. There is no you. But what's interesting here is that there is language. In fact, language is fundamental to who we are. DNA. We can't have any creature without DNA, without programming. A program to develop the creature. Human, computer, animal, doesn't matter. We need programming. We need instruction. We need language. And so language is this fundamental thing that comes before even subjectivity. Before we can talk about a subject, before we can talk about a cohesive, working, whatever it is, a creature, an animal, a human, a computer, any kind of organism, any kind of complex system with at least the illusion, whether it's real intentionality or the illusion of intentionality, there has to be some kind of ordering principle. There has to be a language, a logos. We go back to Descartes and we say, no, Descartes, the fact that you're thinking doesn't mean that you exist. But the fact that you are thinking does necessitate language and logos and an ordering principle to you, or to the process of thinking that you perceive. Even the most basic laws of physics, where do those laws come from? Well, what is a law? A law is an ordering principle. A law is a program. A law is a language. A law is logos. So when we talk about laws of physics, when we say that certain particles behave in certain ways, when we say that, material reality is governed by laws of logic, metalogical laws, mathematical laws, whatever, we're saying that in order for anything to exist, there has to be a logos, there has to be a law, there has to be a language in place. In the beginning, there was law, language, order. Then, from those laws, material substance, matter, energy, interacted with an environment in such a way that it came together to form systems. These systems then built upon one another, and through this process of emergent chaos, we arrived at the illusion of consciousness. What I'm trying to say here is that the ordering principles of the universe are primary, and the subject, the person, is secondary. Going back to Descartes saying, the only thing I can really be certain of is myself. I can't be certain of my reality. I can't be certain of external things. I can only be certain of myself. Modern neuroscience brings that into question. But there is a more fundamental truth. I think, therefore I am. What's the most fundamental truth in that sentence? It's not the subjectivity of the self. It's not the existence of the self. But rather, it's the thinking process. And how do we think? We only think through language. The sentence itself, the syntax of the sentence, it cannot be formulated without language. So language is primary to thinking. Language, ordering, syntax, programming, these things are primary. These things precede the subject. We think of the human being as primary. We think that the human being creates a programming language, and that from this programming language we can then make computers, we can make software, we can do all sorts of things. But in universal terms, it's actually the opposite. It's actually logos and language and programming and ordering comes before subjectivity. We can't have subjectivity, we can't have subjects without first having logos, language, programming, ordering. Really, the thing Descartes should have said is the first thing that we know through the pursuit of knowledge at all, through simply acknowledging the existence of language, we are acknowledging the primacy of language and logos. So when Christianity comes along and says, in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was God, and God created the heavens and the earth, and God created the creatures of the sea and of the air and of the land, and God created everything. He created the sun and the moon and the stars. If we define God as logos, if we define God as the ordering principle, if we define God as the laws that order and govern our universe, that is self-evidently true, that nothing could exist without syntax, without rules. Consider the laws of logic. Where do they come from? Why are they true? Could we have alternative laws? So the law of identity, A equals A. That's a basic logical law. 1 equals 1, red equals red. This equivalence of the self with the self. That equivalence is a logical law. Could there be a different way? I mean, can we even think outside of logical laws and metalogical laws? Can we enter that kind of realm? I don't know if we can even do that. It's almost a similar question to, could we think without language? I can't think without language. And you can say, oh, well, some people, they don't think with written language, they think using pictures. Well, that's another ordering principle. That's another syntax. That's merely a more visual syntax, but there's still rules involved there. Hieroglyphics, whatever you want to call it, pictographs, whatever. You're still conveying meaning through symbols. It's still a language. All visual representation is, in a sense, language. So the dichotomy that people form, oh, well, your left brain is all about mathematics and symbolic abstraction. Your right brain is all about this direct artistic sense and like socializing with people. That's fallacious to begin with. But even on an abstract level, the dichotomy is inaccurate because fundamentally, both of these processes are about symbolically interpreting data to have meaning. Now, one of them, like when we see objects, we almost immediately interpret these. It's a natural, instinctive intuition that we immediately interpret sensory data. Whereas mathematics is a language that's not necessarily intuitive. It's something that has to be taught. So there is a level of abstraction there. There's a level of education there that not everyone has, to be frank. But most people, a lot more people have the ability to interpret visual data versus the number of people who can interpret mathematical formulas. It's the same exact process. It's the interpretation of language. We cannot escape language. In that sense, we can't escape God. Again, if God is logos, if God is an ordering principle, if God is language itself, we can't escape God. And God is actually primary to the self, that we can't conceive of a self without language. I can't conceive of myself without thinking. Without thinking, I would be dead. I would be a dead body, or I would be a zombie, or I'd be an NPC if I didn't have language. So language is the breath that breathes into me that creates my life and creates my personhood and creates my soul. And language, if we identify, we simply equate language with God. God really did create everything. And that's just something we know logically. It's inescapable. There's no way around it. There's no way to posit, oh, well, no, we're going to be atheist, materialist, there is no God. At that point, you have to say there is no language. You have to say there is no ordering principle. You have to say there are no physical laws. There's nothing governing the electron. If you're to say that, if you're to suppose that the universe is entirely arbitrary without any ordering principle, then you're just anti-empirical. You're against every single perception that we have. We're constantly recognizing patterns. And that's all science is, right? It's the recognition of patterns taken to the extreme, where we get more extreme with our measurements and our perceptions and our data, and we're able to extract and formulate different patterns and combine them and see where they lead us. But it's all just pattern recognition. If you're to tell me, no, there's no ordering principle of the universe, there's no God, there's no governing logos, there's no governing language to the universe, it's all arbitrary and random, and bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people, and I don't dispute that. Of course, there's evil in this world. I don't even think it's necessarily proper to say that, the universe is a purely good place, and I don't think it's even right necessarily to say that God is purely good. It does seem reasonable to say the existence of the world is predicated upon the primary existence or the preceding existence of laws and ordering principles and language and logos. So in order for anything to exist, we first had to have laws. And in order for anything to continue existing, we have to have the continued existence of laws. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about a human society that needs laws. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a biochemical system that requires the laws of biochemistry. It doesn't matter if we're talking about the Earth orbiting the sun or the sun in the galaxy or elementary particles interacting. There has to be laws. Without laws, pure chaos, pure arbitrary interactions between, we can't even define particles. If particles had no clearly defined laws governing their behavior, they wouldn't be identifiable as particles. We wouldn't be able to identify electrons because there would be no way to measure electrons because electrons would act differently at every turn. There would be no predictability about them. Therefore, we couldn't label this one thing as being an electron because the electron, it could be over there, sometimes it could be over here. There would be nothing governing its behavior. Now, there is a quantum uncertainty, but the quantum uncertainty is still governed by laws of probability. It's not complete lawlessness. So, when the ancients, whether we're talking about the ancient Norse mythology, where they envisioned the world as beginning with this confrontation between fire and ice, that there was a great icy nothingness and there was a great fiery nothingness, and they came into conflict, they came into contact, and the melting of the ice and the cooling of the fire together created, I think the first thing they say is that there was a cow, and the cow started licking the ice, and then the ice melted, and then there were giants, and then, you had people like Odin or the Aesir came into conflict with the giants, who were actually the sons and daughters of giants, and then they tore apart the giants in a chaotic frenzy, but then they ordered those pieces to be the brains of the giants became the clouds, the bark of the tree was crafted to make the first humans. The Jews in the Old Testament say, well, first there was nothing, and everything was mixed together, and it was just like this dark, infinite ocean. And then God came and he separated the ocean from top. He separated that which is above from that which is below. He separated the light from the darkness. He separated planets and the stars. He separates. He comes to distinguish. He comes to make order. He comes to make laws. The Hindus have similar conceptions. In Shintoism, you have similar concepts of like a divine egg, of like infinite chaos, explosions, big bangs, and then an ordering time. In Greco-Roman mythology, you have Zeus, who fights against the Titans, and the Titans are these elemental, chaotic, unordered behemoths. He defeats them. He introduces the Olympian order. The Olympians, in contrast to the Titans, they're meant to be more ordered, more logical, more sky-oriented as opposed to earth-oriented, Apollonian as opposed to Chthonian. These are the ancient traditions. Science seems to be pointing us in that direction, and programming and neuroscience, logic, all seems to be pointing in that direction. Materialism continues to attack, with its nominalism, it continues to attack spiritual notions and essentialist notions that we can't even conceive of a soul anymore, because that goes against materialist dogma and orthodoxy. And it's all this deconstruction. That brings me to the topic of psychology. You have to wonder, for the materialist, the atheist, who gets themselves to the point where, more and more people are committing suicide, and more people are escaping from reality. And I have to question this adherence to the truth, this adherence to honesty, being brutally honest even when it's ugly. That was sort of H.P. Lovecraft's take, that, the world, the universe is controlled by dark, evil behemoths, by titans, by giants, like Cthulhu. We can't do anything, and they're otherworldly, and if we confront them, they make us go insane. Nietzsche said, if you stare at the abyss stares back. With the breakdown of Christianity, we're now in a position where people are more and more escaping from reality into media, into video games, into Netflix, into pornography at a rate that really is incredible. I mean, the amount of dissociation that we have, the amount of atomization where people are dissociated from one another. They don't interact with real people, they interact with video games. They don't interact with real people, they interact with Netflix. They're not having real sex. I mean, millennials are having less sex than their parents and grandparents, which is incredible. I mean, because we're supposed to be the most sexually liberated generation ever, we're watching more porn than ever. So we're really escaping from reality, and the percentage of waking hours that is actually real seems to be decreasing. It seems more and more the percentage of waking hours is more dedicated toward fantasies. They're more dedicated toward technology, virtual reality. In the workplace, people are going from working with their hands to working with a computer. So everything seems to be moving in this direction, and you have to ask yourself the question, if you're an atheist, if you're a materialist, you have to ask yourself the question, is this real? You can criticize the Christian, you can criticize the religious person for believing in something superstitious, unfalsifiable, something that's not scientifically true. Is Netflix scientifically true? Are video games scientifically true? Is pornography real? You can say that in some sense it is, right? Or you can make the argument that, yes, I know it's fake. Who is then the worse person from the standpoint of being in alignment with the truth? The person who goes to church and believes in the power of the Mass and believes in consubstantiation and believes in these doctrines and dogmas, or the atheist who says, no, church is all fake, there's no such thing as spirituality, there's no such thing as spiritual power, there's no such thing as charism, there's no such thing as transubstantiation, and I love Rick and Morty, and I watch porn, and I engage with this virtual reality. Who is closer to the truth? Who is closer to the honest, unvarnished truth in that situation? I have to really question the moral superiority of the atheist and the materialist if their highest virtue is adherence to the truth. And you have these people like Cult of Dusty or Amazing Atheist or whatever, and they say they hate fakeness. They hate that which is not real, and they say, look, even if Christianity is a comforting myth, I can't believe in it simply because it's not true. What is the alternative? The alternative is living in a virtual reality where we simulate sex with a computer screen, where our careers are not careers, building relationships with people or building manufacturing with our hands. It's building some virtual software on a computer. We're not engaging with reality. We're engaging with something fabricated. We're engaging with something imaginary, with something virtual. This is where the economy is headed. Who is faker? Is it the Christian or is it the materialist atheist living in the modern world? A character is simply the result of habits. So if we say he's a good person, what we mean is he has good habits. If we say he's an honest person, we mean he has a habit of honesty. So really, when we talk about the soul, when we talk about the personality, when we talk about character, we're merely talking about a pattern of habits, a pattern of action. How are people motivated? People are not motivated by pure reason. People are not motivated by cold rationality. People are motivated by emotions. People are motivated by myth. People are motivated by art. And these things cannot be proven with science because they're not dependent on the exterior world. They're dependent on the interior world. Whether or not a piece of music touches our soul does not depend on some exterior reality of whether it's objectively good music according to some YouTube curator or whoever, some Hollywood producer or some, music industry executive. That's not really what determines which is good or bad music. It's internally, how does it make us feel? How does it impact us emotionally? The laws and the ordering principles of psychology are dominant in the realm of our psychology. You can't say, well, I should be this, I should be that, I should be like this, I should do that, and therefore I will do it. I mean, and again, different people have different dispositions, and some people, they might be motivated by pure fact. You could explain something to them, and you say, well, you should eat healthy food, and here's why. Or you should be productive, and here's why. You should work on your social skills, and here's why. You should work on your body, and here's why. You should work on your intellect and your education, here's why. You should work on your work ethic, and here's why. You could explain that to people. You could explain the positives and the negatives, the short-term, the long-term benefits. And some people might be motivated on that alone, but I think other people have basic psychological requirements. People require community. They require people who love them, and people who they love, and people who they admire. They require hierarchy. They require a archetype in their mind of an ideal person. What would I look like if I was the best I could be? And we have an archetype, whether that's Jesus Christ or God the Father or Odin, or it's Hercules, or it's that Hollywood actor, or whether it's my teacher from 5th grade, or whether it's my sports coach, or whoever we're thinking about. We have to have an archetype of the ideal motivates us to improve ourselves. And if we don't have that, the opposite of improvement is not stagnation. The opposite of improvement is self-destruction. There's so much propaganda making Christianity look stupid and silly, making religion in general look stupid and silly, making archetypes and ideals look stupid and silly, and calling anything great is called try hard. It's unsustainable, and the way that it's resolved is people escape into video games where there are legitimate mythologies, and I'm not even, I criticize video games, but at the same time, people are escaping into video games because video games are better than the reality that's presented to us. Netflix is better than the reality. It still contains within itself ideals and archetypes. It's not just arbitrary because there's a script that's made there, and we can accept that. We can accept that a story has a script, it has a narrative, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has a logical construction to it, and we escape into that because the world has lost its logos. We've lost God. Now we're very confused. We don't have archetypes. We don't have ideals. We don't have sacred spaces. We don't have good and evil. Really, the last thing we have in terms of religion, and we could argue, I think, back and forth, someone could refute everything I'm saying right now by saying, no, there is a very strong religious fervor in the world right now, at least in the Western world. And there is a pantheon of saints like Martin Luther King and Muhammad Gandhi. The majority of their time is being spent slaying virtual dragons in virtual worlds. They're having sex with virtual women in virtual videos. They have virtual jobs in virtual video games. There are millions of people who are really just dropping out of the real world, and they're escaping into something else because they can't confront reality. The way that they explain it is they say, video games are fun and the real world is not, and this is just how I prefer to live my life. They're living hedonistically. They're not serving some kind of higher community. They don't conceive themselves as part of a larger organism. For them, that is the logical choice. Some people still have ideals. Some people still have archetypes. Some people have these unquenchable dreams. And some people are not satisfied with this virtual reality. Men of history and world historical thinkers look at the raising of a child as parochial, as insignificant, as below them, as childish even. But it is something vitally important. If children aren't raised properly, you don't have a civilization, you don't have science and art. Are you going to live in this virtual reality? Are you going to live in this pornographic, hedonistic world? Or are you going to try to escape from the escapism? Are you going to try to confront reality? There are all kinds of worlds being constructed for us. Video games, pornography, Netflix, these are constructed worlds. Game of Thrones was a constructed world. It was constructed in order to be convenient, so that we could sit in our bed, in our chair, in our basement, and we could absorb and we could escape. And that was easy, and that was fun, and that was pleasurable. But was it right? There is a gnawing, a nagging feeling that some people have where, there's got to be more than this. We were brought here for a purpose. We are meant for more than just passive consumerism of media. We're meant to be creators. And if we ourselves don't have the creativity, then certainly we are laborers, we are workers, we are warriors, we are people who can support the leaders in the community and the creators in the community. The most important thing, I think, is just having people, having a community. Without community, there can be no language. It's part of the reason why the Bible says, wherever there is a gathering of followers, there is the Spirit of Christ. If we speak about language as the ordering principle of the universe, and human language as being deeply connected with our communal life, our social life, then we can't be in harmony with God if we are not somehow in harmony with a community. The aesthetic path, or the ascetic path, I should say, the path of living up in the mountains, the path of living in the forest and abandoning society, for the purpose of reflection, for the purpose of differentiation, for the purpose of letting go of one's own individual selfishness, one's own individual attachments, can be productive for the wider society if then the lessons learned are brought back to civilization. So that can serve its own purpose. But to totally detach, then you do lose your connection to the universe at some point. That's, my general thoughts. I mean, can I tell you that I have proven that there is a man living in the sky called God? No. I don't think anyone can prove that. Are there people who have believed that sort of thing in the past? Sure. Do I defend that claim? No. We are creatures of our perception. We can't escape our human nature. We can't escape the laws of logic. We can't escape our psychology. A person who is depressed, and you can't just tell them to stop being depressed and that will fix the problem. We do need to understand psychology. We need to understand emotions. We need to understand motivation. We need to understand how people work, and not just say, well, people should be like this, but say, no, people are like this. And here's what's happened when you domesticate people, when you urbanize people, when you atomize people, they end up killing themselves or self-destructing or hedonizing or escaping. And there are predictable results from this kind of conditioning. This kind of environment produces these kind of results. We have to ask ourselves, first of all, is it all worth it? Is it something we endorse morally? And secondly, given the fact that we're powerless to change globalization and capitalism and all of these things, there's no obvious solution. I mean, if there was, I'm sure someone much smarter than me, like, Ted Kaye, would have implemented something like that instead of taking a more violent route, a more desperate route. I don't think there is an obvious solution on a global level, but we do have to start looking honestly in the sense of, what can we as individuals do? What should we do? If you simply reject reality to the utmost, you can't really interact with reality. But if you accept reality for what it is entirely, then you will have no impact. So there has to be some kind of compromise between total acceptance and total rejection if you want to change anything, if you want to be a force on your fellow man. You have to find the balance of compromise that is right for you, and that might be different for different people. I think that's enough for now. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.